cub's cries tore through the morning fog like knives through cloth, sharp and desperate, a sound that stopped every heart in its tracks. It wasn't just noise. It was pure anguish. A plea so raw it seemed to make the earth itself ache. Tiny paws stumbled over the uneven ground of the enclosure, his fragile legs barely able to carry his shaking body. His wide, golden eyes searched every shadow, every face beyond the fence, but none belonged to the one he was calling for. His mother was gone, and he could not understand why. Haley felt her chest tighten painfully as she hurried to the edge of the enclosure. She had heard cries like this before, but none had ever cut so deeply. This was not the hunger whine of a cub needing food. This was the sound of a soul unraveling. She dropped to her knees, her eyes locked on the trembling creature no bigger than a house cat, and gently pressed her palm against the cold wire of the fence. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, though she knew her words were a fragile shield against the weight of his terror. The cub's ears twitched at her voice, his cries hitching for a moment. But then they rose again, louder, as if he hoped his mother could hear him wherever she had gone. Behind Haley, the staff murmured in tense concern. They had searched since dawn, but the mother was still missing, lost during the frantic relocation the day before. She should have been here. She should have been curled around her cub, shielding him from the cold, from fear, from this lonely despair. Haley's throat ached. She could see it in his eyes, a growing fear that chilled her to the bone. He was slipping toward the edge of a hopelessness, and once he crossed that line, no amount of care could bring him back. She could not bear the thought. "I promise you," Haley said softly, her voice breaking, "I will bring her back to you." The cub's gaze held hers for a single, trembling heartbeat, as if somewhere inside his small, frightened chest he wanted to believe her. Then he cried out once more, a sound so full of longing it left tears burning in her eyes, and the desperate race to keep that promise truly began. Haley's promise clung to the cold morning air, but even as the words left her lips, doubt gnawed at the edges of her heart. She rose slowly, her eyes still locked on the cub, who had collapsed beside the fence, sides heaving from his exhausted cries. His tiny chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, as if even breathing had become too heavy a burden without his mother's warmth beside him. Haley forced herself to turn away, swallowing the lump in her throat, because time was already slipping through her fingers. Just yesterday, hope had filled the sanctuary. The rescue had been brutal, but successful. Haley remembered every moment, the way the lioness had fought against the confines of the transport cage, her roars shaking the very bones of those nearby. She had clawed and pushed, not for herself, but for the cub trapped in a separate crate. Through the gaps, mother and child had locked eyes, their silent panic passing between them like lightning. Haley had tried to soothe the mother with quiet words, her own hands trembling as she checked the locks again and again. But then, disaster struck. A jolt from the transport truck had unlatched the mother's cage just as the convoy hit rough ground. In the chaos, she had bolted, wild instincts driving her into the nearby scrublands before anyone could react. They had secured the cub, helpless and crying, but the mother vanished into the wilderness, her freedom marked by a trail of broken branches and fading roars. Now, Haley gripped the memory with painful clarity. She had seen it in the lioness's eyes, that unbreakable bond, that fire of maternal love no distance could extinguish. "She's out there," Haley whispered to herself, clinging to that truth. "She's looking for him." The staff around her moved with practiced urgency, but Haley could feel the growing weight of despair pressing down on them all. Without his mother, the cub wouldn't survive long. He had already refused formula, pushing away the bottle with pitiful mules, as though no human care could ever replace what he had lost. Haley's jaw tightened with quiet resolve. She would not let this story end in heartbreak. She had made a promise, and no matter what it cost her, she would see it kept. Somewhere in the wild, a mother was still searching for her child, and Haley knew she had to find her before it was too late. The sun pushed higher into the pale sky, but its warmth did nothing to ease the chill crawling through Haley's veins. She moved quickly through the dense undergrowth beyond the sanctuary's perimeter, her boots crunching over dry twigs, eyes scanning the earth for any sign of the lioness. Every heartbeat felt like a drum pounding in her chest, steady and urgent, keeping her mind sharp against the rising tide of fear. She couldn't let herself think of the cub's fading strength, of his cries growing softer with each passing hour. She could not fail him. Tracks, fresh, clear in the soft soil beneath a tangle of low branches. Haley dropped to her knees, tracing the wide paw prints with trembling fingers. The lioness had passed here not long ago. Her stride was uneven, the left side dragging slightly. Haley's stomach twisted. She could picture it too easily, the frantic flight through unfamiliar terrain, the way pain would bite at every step. But still, the mother had kept going, driven by a force far stronger than fear. "She's close," Haley murmured, not to anyone in particular, but as a quiet prayer, a lifeline to hope. Behind her, two trackers nodded silently, their eyes hardened by experience but softened now by the weight of this mission. They all knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about saving an animal, it was about reuniting a family that had been torn apart by human error and wild circumstance. The brush thickened, clawing at Haley's arms as she pushed through, uncaring of the scratches left behind. Her mind kept returning to the cub, alone in the enclosure, his tiny body curling tighter as if trying to preserve what little warmth remained in his fragile frame. She imagined his nose searching the empty air for the scent of his mother, imagined his final cries swallowed by loneliness. Number? She wouldn't let that happen. A sudden sound snapped her thoughts back to the present. A low, hoarse roar, broken but unmistakable. Haley's breath caught in her throat. It came from beyond the next ridge. Hope, fierce and immediate, surged through her chest. The lioness was still fighting, still searching. Haley rose to her feet, her voice steady and certain as she whispered to herself, "Hold on. We're coming." Haley pushed forward, her legs burning with exhaustion, but she refused to slow down. The echo of that broken roar lingered in the air, pulling her like an invisible thread through the dense maze of thorns and shadows. Sweat clung to her skin, the midday heat closing in, but all she could think about was the cub waiting behind the enclosure walls, growing weaker with every tick of the relentless clock. She had promised him. Her heart pounded that truth over and over, louder than the pounding of her feet against the earth. She caught sight of another paw print, deeper than before, pressed hard into the soft mud near a fallen tree. The lioness was tiring, her strength bleeding away, but she was still moving, still searching. Haley's chest tightened at the thought. She knew the pain of separation too well, the sleepless nights haunted by fear, the endless ache of not knowing if someone you loved was out there, lost and afraid. It was a pain sharp enough to hollow a person from the inside. She had seen it in people, seen it in animals, and now she saw it here, in every mark the lioness left behind. One of the trackers caught up beside her, breathless but determined. "She's heading back toward the lowlands," he said, voice tight with urgency. Haley's heart leapt. The lowlands curved toward the sanctuary's outer edge. The mother was circling home, drawn by the instinct that refused to let her give up. Lightning flickered at the edge of the horizon, a warning that the weather was turning. If the rains came, they would lose the tracks. Worse, the cub might not survive another cold night without his mother's warmth. Haley felt the storm building both in the sky and inside her chest, a fierce mixture of hope and fear twisting together. "Faster!" she urged, her voice cracking from dust and desperation. They surged ahead, dodging sharp branches, slipping over loose stones, hearts racing against time itself. And then, another sound pierced the heavy air. A roar, clearer now, fuller, driven not by panic but by relentless purpose. Haley's breath shuddered. The mother was calling, not for herself, but for her child, for her cub who still waited, still cried, still believed, and in that moment Haley knew this wasn't over, not yet. The sound of the lioness's call pushed Haley harder than any shouted command ever could. She felt it like a pulse in her chest, thudding in time with her footsteps as she chased the fading echoes through the thickening heat. Each roar seemed to stitch hope back into her lungs, even as the sky darkened and the first breath of rain touched the air. The storm was close now, and she knew if it broke it would wash away every trail, every chance they had left. But the mother had not given up. Haley wouldn't either. They followed the calls, breath ragged, bodies aching, until they saw it. Tufts of golden fur snagged on a thorn bush, still fresh, trembling slightly in the growing wind. Haley's heart kicked against her ribs. She reached out, fingers brushing the strands with reverence, as if touching them could somehow carry her voice to the lioness herself. "She's near," Haley whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The tracker beside her gave a short nod, but his eyes were locked on the ground, following the newest prints leading down the slope toward the marshy edge of the lowlands. Haley's thoughts flashed to the cub, his frail body curled tightly against the chill that had crept into the sanctuary air. She imagined him whimpering softly, waiting for a warmth that only his mother could give. The fear clawed at her chest, but she pushed it down. She couldn't let herself break now. Ahead, the brush thinned. Haley motioned for the team to slow, her breath shallow, and then they saw her. The lioness stood alone at the edge of the clearing, head lowered but eyes fierce, locked on the scent-marked trail they had prepared. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, fur matted from the rough terrain, but her spirit had not dimmed. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her nostrils flaring as she caught the familiar scent of her cub on the blanket they had laid down as a guide. Haley's throat tightened. In that moment, beneath the bruised sky, she saw not a predator but a mother fighting every force of nature to reach her child. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, spattering the earth and the lioness alike. But the mother didn't flinch. She moved with new urgency, her path set, her mission clear. Haley felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered to the wind, "Keep going. He's waiting for you." The rain thickened, falling in steady sheets that blurred the trees and washed the scent trails into the earth. Haley's chest tightened as she watched the lioness pause, her nose lifted to the wind, straining for a trace of her cub. For a moment, fear twisted Haley's breath, afraid the mother might lose the fragile thread connecting her to her child. But then the lioness stepped forward, slow but certain, guided by something far stronger than sight or scent, the pull of her heart. Haley followed from a cautious distance, the trackers flanking her in silence, every eye fixed on the lioness. Thunder rumbled low across the horizon, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The storm wanted to drown this moment, to bury hope beneath mud and noise, but the mother refused to be deterred. She pushed on, every step a defiance of exhaustion and pain, as though sheer will alone would carry her to her cub. Haley's heart clenched at the sight. She had seen strength before, in people and animals alike, but never like this. Never so raw, so relentless. Her own legs ached, her lungs burned, but she kept pace, unwilling to let the lioness out of her sight. She thought of the cub, his small body growing colder, his cries fainter beneath the weight of waiting. The storm had stolen the sun, but it hadn't stolen his hope. Not yet. The lioness climbed a rise in the soaked earth and paused at the top. Her ears flicked forward, and for a heartbeat she stood frozen in the rain. Then Haley heard it, barely audible over the patter of water and the hiss of wind, a thin, quivering cry. The cub. He was still calling, still holding on. The lioness roared in answer, a sound that cut through the storm like fire through the cold. It was not fierce but full of urgency and love, a mother's cry back to her child. Without hesitation, she bounded down the slope, ignoring the mud clinging to her paws. Haley's throat tightened with emotion, her eyes blurring with tears as she stumbled after them. "Don't stop!" she pleaded under her breath, her voice breaking against the sound of the rain. "He's calling for you. He's still waiting." The lioness didn't stop. Her body, soaked and trembling from fatigue, moved with a power that defied the storm's weight. Haley pushed herself to keep up, breath catching in her throat as the mother crossed the clearing with fierce, unstoppable momentum. The rain blurred her vision, but she refused to wipe it away. She had to see this through, had to witness the moment that felt so close she could almost taste it in the charged air. At the sanctuary's edge, the cub lay huddled against the base of a sheltering rock, his tiny frame motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his breath. Haley's heart ached at the sight. She dropped to her knees beside him, shielding him from the worst of the rain with her own body. His eyes fluttered open, dull with exhaustion, but when he heard the faint sound of his mother's roar, something inside him sparked. His ears twitched, his nose lifted, and a weak cry escaped him, thin but alive. The lioness heard it too. Her head snapped toward the sound, and for an instant her eyes locked with Haley's. In them, Haley saw a storm fiercer than any in the sky, fear, hope, desperation, and a love so deep it pushed everything else aside. Without hesitation, the mother closed the final distance. Mud splashed beneath her paws, rain slicked her fur, but she didn't falter. Haley scrambled back, giving her space, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. The team moved quietly, quickly unlatching the gate that separated mother from child. It swung open with a groan, and the lioness slipped through as if the barrier had never been there at all. What happened next stole the breath from everyone watching. The mother dropped beside her cub, her massive body curling protectively around his fragile form. She licked him frantically, rough tongue working over his sodden fur, coaxing life back into his tiny frame. The cub whimpered weakly, then nuzzled into her warmth, his small paws kneading at her chest as though to make sure she was real. Haley's throat tightened with a sob she couldn't contain. Against the storm, against every cruel twist of fate, they had found their way back to each other, mother and child, together again. And in that moment, beneath the rain and the weeping sky, the sanctuary was filled not with fear or exhaustion, but with the quiet triumph of love returned. The storm finally softened, as if the sky itself had been waiting for this reunion before it could rest. Rain fell in gentle drops now, sliding from the lioness's fur as she cradled her cub beneath her body, sheltering him from the last cold winds. Haley stood just beyond the enclosure, her breath still unsteady, her eyes never leaving the pair. She watched the cub press closer to his mother, his tiny sides heaving as he drew in her warmth like breath itself. His frail cries faded into soft, contented sounds, and for the first time in days there was no fear in them, only belonging. The lioness, her strength nearly drained, lifted her head and scanned the faces watching her. Her eyes found Haley's again, holding her gaze for a brief, unspoken moment of understanding. There was no wildness in them now, no panic or fight, only something deeper. Gratitude. Trust. Haley swallowed the lump in her throat, feeling tears blur her vision once more. The staff stood in quiet awe, no one daring to speak as the rain eased into mist, and the earth breathed beneath their feet. What they had witnessed was not just a rescue, but a miracle carved from patience and relentless love. Haley felt it settle deep in her heart, the undeniable truth that kindness, no matter how small or desperate, could change the course of even the wildest fates. The cub, stronger already in his mother's embrace, latched on to nurse, his body warming beneath her watchful care. The life that had nearly slipped away was rekindled, and Haley let her tears fall freely now, knowing they belonged to this moment as much as the rain and the wind and the earth that had borne witness to it all. She stepped back, allowing the family their peace, and whispered softly, "You're safe now, together." If this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder that kindness, even in its quietest form, holds the power to bring light to the darkest moments. Subscribe to our channel for more real, moving stories like this. Stories that celebrate love, resilience, and the miracles born from compassion. Join our growing family of hearts that believe in second chances and the beauty of never giving up. Together, let's keep hope alive, one story at a time. Subscribe now and carry these moments of kindness with you wherever you go.